If you don't teach the people in your company how to talk about mental health, your workforce has an expiration date. Yeah.
People aren't bad or evil for the culture of construction, but now that we know and we're able to equip people with the tools, we have a responsibility to do something about it.
We have to move from awareness into action, because if we don't teach people the conversational literacy, all we're doing is saying mental health is important and providing data and not teaching people the language that we all need to know how to speak. I think that the two things that people can start doing is basically saying,
Hello, and welcome back to the Human Side of Construction podcast, where we provide construction leaders the insights they need to improve the industry and the great people in it. Today, I've got a very special guest, Ms. Melissa Doman, an organizational psychologist, former mental health therapist, founder of the Workplace Mental Health Method, and author of 2 books, not one, on mental health at work, the most recent of which just released this February. Melissa has trained organizations like Google, Microsoft, and Salesforce on how to actually have these conversations. And I thought she'd be a good fit for the show because I think construction is long overdue for exactly what she's building. Melissa, thanks for spending some time with me, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed doing work with, construction and manufacturing and contracting companies in recent years. And, we can have the real conversation, not the corporate BS conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I totally see that in a lot of people I've talked to. And I think largely, this whole mental health thing in the world, but specifically in construction, we're in an awareness
Mhm.
phase. And I think a lot of people are just thinking it's a check the box exercise, like having an EAP program or providing a toolbox talk or sending
Yeah.
out an email to your people. But it's really about more than that. So, and we're going to get into more of your method and how it can be applied. I always like to kind of start at the beginning. So let's kind of go back. You were a licensed therapist. You're practicing in a personal practice. So you had the credentials, the licensure, everything, and then you decided to kind of pivot and go more the organizational route.
Yeah.
What was that journey like, and what kind of triggered that to go on a different type of path?
Gosh, letting go of the alphabet soup after my name was was a really tough decision. I think at one point, I'm not exaggerating, I had 10 letters after
Hmm.
my name, and now I just have 2. So it was like, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Um, it was a difficult decision, but it was a necessary one. And I will never forget, there was one day where I was standing in my office. I was in a group practice at the time. And I looked out the window and I said, this is not going to do enough. All of my clients don't feel they can talk to anybody else about their mental health except, for me or a few close confidants. Certainly none of them could talk about it at work.
Hmm.
And I didn't think that it would be effective to try to treat clients in a broken system and a broken narrative. So I made a very difficult decision to leave clinical work and try to make an impact at the source. And so I transitioned into very traditional, industrial organizational psychology, which back then in 2013, clinical folks didn't do that. Everybody was told to kind of stay in their lane. People didn't see the translatable skills. And I was like, it's the same skill set, but it's a different population, different interventions, different outcomes. And now these days, so many clinicians are going into org psych because it's been demonstrably proven that it's helpful. And
Hmm.
so when I made that transition first, whenever I would talk about mental health or stress, people would proverbially like hiss at me, almost like it was a dirty word. And I
Hmm.
was like, well, that's interesting because it's not. And so I did a lot around emotional intelligence, intentional communication, constructive conflict, radical candor feedback. I still do that work. I love that work. And I use those modalities to help us talk about mental health at work. But then I didn't subspecialize until work in workplace mental health until I was living in London. Because in London, really the UK, I mean, they started off things globally,
Hmm.
really in the workplace, which was not on my bingo card. When I was there, the company I was working for at the time said, "Oh, I used to be a therapist. Could you do a mental health awareness campaign?" I was like, "Yes, I can."
Hmm.
And normally their workshops would have maybe 12 people, something like that. And this one had 100. So I said, okay, the market is telling me that it's ready, that it needs this. But then just like you were talking about awareness building, I spent time doing that, doing the awareness building. But then I noticed that there wasn't a lot of change happening other than people saying mental health was important, but the conversations weren't changing. And
Yeah.
so the last few years, and what led me to name my company the way I did, was we have to move from awareness into action. Because if we don't teach people the conversational literacy, the skill set to have the conversation, all we're doing is saying mental health is important and providing data and not teaching people the language that we all need to know how to speak. And so I went from the back end as a therapist to the front end doing workplace psychology. And I've seen both ends of the spectrum. And unless you treat talking about mental health like a skill, there won't be any movement.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I went through a recent exercise. We were doing some feedback at work, right? It had nothing to do with mental health. It was just about the processes at work and stuff. And somebody
Hmm.
said,
Hmm.
the last time we went through this procedure, we asked for the feedback and then nothing changed. And that was really dehumanizing, even more so than just not talking about it in the first place. So, and I think that's kind of where we're at in terms of the mental health stuff now. It's like, you see the posters, you hear the conversations, you see executives
Yeah.
talking about mental health, how it matters. But what are we doing to
Yeah.
move the needle? And that's where,
Well,
we can talk about your books and the framework for a little bit. Because I love how
yeah.
you're challenging the aspect that awareness isn't enough. And I don't think
No.
people are bad. I don't think it's motivated by like, oh, I don't really care.
No.
That's why I'm not doing anything. I
No.
honestly, people don't have the tools,
Correct.
Melissa. They don't have the steps to take. So maybe let's
Correct.
look at that. So now that we say we've got this awareness thing figured out, we know the stats, we know there's a
Hmm.
problem. What are
Hmm.
some steps people can take? And maybe you can pull examples from your books or your the workplace mental health method as well.
What's funny is my husband is the one who lovingly forced me to put my books behind me on, calls, podcasts, stuff like that. Because those authors who are like, did you know I wrote a book? Did you know I
Mm,
wrote a book? And then they kind of hold it in your face and you're like, yes, I'm aware you wrote a book. But, it's I answer the questions because I created the tools for that reason. But I'm always
mhm,
very aware of not coming off as a self-aggrandizing author because so many people do.
mhm,
But that's honestly why I wrote the books. I was just so um what is the term I want to use? Disappointed that it just kept being it's important, it's important, it's important. And then you have all these people being like, what do I do with that? And so the way I tend to approach it, it's about what you understand about the topic and the words you use to talk about the topic. So the
mm,
first book, which is a mouthful, yes, you can talk about mental health at work. Here's why and how to do it well. I know super vague. You have no idea what you're going to get. Is really a guidebook on helping people get on the same page about what mental health, stress, and mental illness are, what it's not, how that topic is influenced through personal factors, outside of work, how it's shaped inside of work, and really the methodology and the language to have constructive, successful conversations as opposed to resulting or resorting to unhelpful platitudes and silver linings that never really help anybody. And
mhm,
then the second book is focused on, again, shifting the narrative around humanizing leaders, that they are people with limits, not just symbols of stability, and that they also need to talk about their mental health in the workplace, but through the lens of leadership and power dynamics, because those are very, very real. So I think that the two things that people can start doing is basically saying, well, what do I think about mental health? What does it mean to me? What do I think about mental illness? What does that mean to me? How do I feel about those topics? Do I want to talk about it at work? If I do, who do I want to talk to? What do I want to say? What do I
mhm.
want them to do with the information? What am I prepared to do with the information? And then it comes down to using resources like those two books or my LinkedIn learning courses to actually learn more about the topic and equip yourself with the words to actually do it. And so going back to my time in the UK, This is very, very different depending on the country, but you're in Canada, for example, duty of care in the UK, and I know that Canada has its own version under different naming, and Australia has their own version. The US is more about duty of care for physical health as opposed to emotional health.
Hmm.
But the nice thing for countries like Canada, the UK, Australia, is that there's even more legal protections for workers to be able to have these conversations in the workplace. So having the skill set to do so, in my opinion, is critical professional development across every industry.
Hmm.
So those are the places I'd recommend to start.
Yeah, and irrespective of industry, for the time being now, anyways, I just did a podcast on AI, which we're not going to get into that here. But
Oh gosh.
irrespective of industry, people are doing the work, right?
They
And
are,
people cannot turn off their personal lives when they walk through the gates on a job site or when they walk through the doors in an office. And
despite popular opinion.
this, what's that? Sorry.
I said, despite popular opinion,
Despite
where
popular
people
opinion,
think
yeah, yeah.
it's not one brain and one body that does both.
And it's funny when I talk to people, usually of an older vintage, but they say, "Oh, it's not like this in my day. We didn't have these issues." I'm like, "For sure, you had these issues, buddy. It's just you pushed them down and you pretended they didn't exist, but they
Yeah,
manifested themselves in other ways, whether it's
yeah,
drinking at night, or other substance misuse, or
yeah,
God forbid, other issues, suicidal ideation. Like you don't just
yeah,
push this stuff down into a black box and there's a magic vacuum that takes it away." So,
yeah,
and you touched on something that's I'm learning is more and more important is language, right? And it
yeah.
sounds stupid in a sense, but it's so simple. If you don't communicate to somebody in a way that they understand or are willing to accept that info,
Mhm.
it's not going to go through. I think that's a barrier for entry or barrier to getting
Mm.
treatment for a lot of people, especially in construction. Because
Well,
the archetype is, you got to be a big tough man, push it down, leave your
mm,
feelings at home, life sucks, get over it. So if
mm,
you come into that with somebody and say, "Oh, you should try therapy," they're going to tell you to
mhm.
F off. But if you go about it in other ways, and I've talked to
Yeah,
different people who are building interesting programs around peer support, right? So people in construction
yep,
with lived experience
yeah,
to help not treat. Obviously, you need to be a professional to do it, but act as a
yeah,
guidepost to say, "I've been there. I know what you're going through. This is
right.
what works for me. This is where you can go get help." So it is
Well,
there are nuances there for the different industries, right?
absolutely. And the reason I kept like eagerly interjecting is I really agree with a lot of what you're saying, because what these books try to accomplish and what my work tries to accomplish is to fill the hours between maybe going to therapy, calling the employee assistance program, which, by the way, I used to be an employee assistance program counselor. That is one of the most underutilized mental health resources in every business, because many
Hmm.
people don't understand what it does and they're afraid to use it for confidentiality reasons, even though the calls are confidential, except if you're going to bring harm to yourself, other people, or in cases of child abuse or elder abuse.
Hmm.
So having conversations about emotional health is for all the hours in between. It's not a clinical intervention. It's a communication skill set. And the way that I look at it is talking about emotional health in the workplace. It's just about being able to function. And so, yes, when people think of mental health, just like you were saying, they automatically go to therapy. And I go, there is so much more to
Hmm.
mental health than just going to therapy. There's peer support, there's social health, there is the way you talk to yourself, your internal narrative. There are all these things that make up mental health. And so what I'm trying to do is focus on embedding these conversations in the workplace where a therapist isn't needed in those moments, or HR isn't necessarily needed in those
Hmm.
moments, because it's a common nomenclature that really can span across generations. But because of generational differences and generations finger pointing at each other, which is what usually happens,
Hmm.
then the conversation doesn't happen. So the way I look at it is, let's say that older person would say, "Oh, in my day we shoved it down and, whatever." And the common response is, well, that might have been what you did, but doesn't mean it's healthy. You
Hmm.
know, for folks who grew up in the industry at that time, that's not their fault. They did what they could when they could with what they had with whatever social permission existed. So
Hmm.
now it's, I understand that. I do. We found a healthier way. So we need to make these changes because people are hurting. They're resorting to substance abuse, hurting themselves, these sorts of things. So there has to be an acknowledgement of when those people came up so they don't feel dismissed, and to have them on side to be part of creating change. They're not expecting the next generation to suffer the way they did because they didn't have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. When you know better, you do better. And I've kind of come to learn. I mean, I can look back to different situations in my life, and there's always what if, what if I did this? What if I did that?
Mhm.
At any given time, you make decision with the information you have, and it's the best decision
Yeah.
with the best information at the time. And like you said,
Hmm. Yeah.
people aren't bad or evil for the way things have been treated in the culture of construction, because it's no one person's fault. But now
Hmm.
that we know and we're able to equip people with the tools, like we have a
Yeah.
responsibility to do something about it. Say now, we're talking to somebody in a leadership position. Okay, so they see somebody struggling at work or something, and you can tell that
Mhm.
something's up.
Yeah.
People that
Usually.
you work with in organizations, what would you say are common pitfalls? Like where do leaders go wrong,
Mhm.
and what can they do kind of in that moment? It's probably not a simple question, but
Well, I'll do the best I can because that
yeah,
in itself could be its own podcast episode.
for sure.
Um, so you had mentioned something earlier I wanted to expand on in relation to this, where plant supervisors, site managers, where they also now have to take care of everybody's issues, quote unquote.
Hmm.
I actually don't see it that way. I see it as training managers to be aware of the importance of mental health and mental illness in the workplace, and being able to have the skill set to have those conversations, direct people to the right resources. And in some cases that can preventatively save people's lives. But also there is a important piece of managers encouraging those they manage to also care about developing that skill set themselves. Now, where I see a lot of businesses go wrong is, yes, they'll train the managers and they'll only train them to be symptom watchers, but
Hmm.
not teaching them how to have the conversation. Now, there are some people who struggle with mental health that you would never, ever know, ever, unless
Hmm.
they told you, because they're so good at hiding it. I've seen it over and over again. So I think that for the managers, there's the opportunity, obviously, to have a general idea of what mental health struggles can present like, but also teaching them the skills of how to talk about just emotional well-being in general, and not in like a weird touchy-feely sort of way. And it could be in very accessible, conversational tones and things like that. But on top of it, it's tasking the people they work with, who are also chronologically aged adults, to care about and value and manage their own emotional health in a way
Hmm.
that makes sense for them, because they also need to have skin in the game. They also need to understand, like, yeah, my supervisor manager can look out for us, but like, I need to give a shit about myself too.
Hmm.
I need to make sure that I get the support I need, or that I'm telling somebody if I need help. And there's a lot of stigma and obstacles, and I get that. I do. But if we only put it on the managers to raise those conversations, to raise this topic in the workplace, it's kind of like throwing a rock into a pond. The ripples eventually will stop.
Hmm.
So in my opinion, I think that leaders need to have the skills, obviously, to talk about this with their teams, but there also needs to be a narrative shift within the team as a whole, that each adult has to be responsible for their mental health and for asking for what they need, letting others know what's going on, showing up for other people. It can't just be on the leaders, even though the leaders are a very, very influential point of intervention.
Yeah, and the end goal is not, training frontline supervisors to be licensed therapists.
Correct.
It's to
Correct.
facilitate it's the culture, right? And it's all about empowering people
Exactly.
to me. And it
Exactly.
starts with self-awareness. Like, I can speak from my own personal journey. I can think back to the exact moment in time where I was dealing with a particular issue. I was in therapy, I was reading books, but I
Mhm.
hadn't given myself the time or the space to acknowledge that I'm fucked up. And I remember the moment I was sitting on my back deck and I was like, I accepted it. I was like, I'm pretty
I'm
messed up.
going through some shit.
And it wasn't like a pity party. It was actually a
No.
beautiful moment because I remember thinking I'm
Oh.
messed up, but so is everybody else. And we're just doing the
Yes.
best with the tools we have. And the problem is,
Yes.
Melissa, not a lot of people have the tools to deal with their shit. And
No.
but it starts with self-awareness. And it's okay to have these issues, whatever happened to you, whatever made you this way, it's not your fault, but it's your fault
Yeah.
for staying that way. I'm sorry, that might sound harsh, but you have the
Well,
power.
I have a more accessible way to say what you're saying. We're
Yeah.
saying the same thing. In my first book and in my second one, I said having mental illness is not a choice. Having
Hmm.
mental health struggles is not a choice. But what you do about it is your choice,
Hmm.
provided you have access to resources and can afford to use them, which talks about social and financial marginalization. That's a topic for another day. But if you know you are struggling and you choose not to do something about it, as someone who can do something about it, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that felt a little softer.
no, no, no. I know what you mean. It does sound softer. You have the right
It's the
words. It's
same
funny.
thing though, just different words.
I love talking to professionals in this space because you just are so much more eloquent. And I remember talking to somebody and they were
Oh,
talking about
thanks.
somatic something, this and that, and I had no idea the words, but I could feel what they were
Yeah.
saying. I was like, yes,
Yeah.
that's what I feel like is in my head. Thank you for putting it in those
We're saying the
words.
same
So
thing with different words.
yeah, again, going back to the language and the accessibility there.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so you've been doing this a long time, right? You've worked with organizations and you've probably had some adopt it and go well, and others that kind of struggled because there was some
Mhm,
friction there.
mhm.
What does the process look like? And not the nuts and bolts. People can get that from your books, or they can contact you. We'll go through your
Sure,
contact info later.
sure.
But like, what does the
Yeah.
process look like? What is the timeline to kind of set a company up for success when it comes to empowering their people and having a program like this?
Well, you and I both know this is not a checkbox exercise. Some businesses also know that, but treat it that way anyway. So they're not the ones we're going to be talking about. But it really comes down to embedding it as a cultural practice within an organization where it's understood that it's an evergreen topic, not just
Hmm.
during Mental Health Awareness Month in May and World Mental Health Day in October, because mental health doesn't go away and it's
Hmm.
there 365, 24/7. Now, that doesn't mean that companies need to talk about it 365, 24/7. I talk about this for a living and I don't even want to talk about it that much. But what it really comes down to with the clients that I work with, especially, a lot of my clients have been working with 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where the first thing to do is establish purpose and narrative and intended outcomes. Now, clients will usually have me come in, do a fireside interview. They have me talking to senior leaders in the business where we're talking about why is mental health a critical business conversation? Why are we even talking about this? To
Hmm.
basically get people on the same page about what is the purpose of this conversation instead of just throwing people into workshops, which is what people usually do, and then talking about obstacles, concerns, challenges, what does success look like? Basically, just warming people up to the idea. Because even though we all have mental health, our experiences are different. And people, as they go through the stages of change, need to be warmed up to the idea of doing things differently and considering it differently. Then, once those narrative sessions have been established, then we go into upskilling. Now that I usually recommend in cohorts or by department, by seniority, whatever that needs to be around sustainable stress management, how to talk about your mental health at work, navigating uncertainty, developing discomfort tolerance, being able to use emotional intelligence through intentional communication. These are all learnable skills. Making sure that the HR department understands about the importance of compliance in talking
Mhm.
about mental health in the workplace. So, in my experience, this is something you want to really do over a series of months and even years, because
Yeah.
the last thing you want to do is blast people with information too much too quickly, and they get annoyed and they're like, fuck this, this is too much.
Yeah. No,
So it
and
takes time.
if you don't use it, you lose it, right? I've been there where you have a
Yeah.
training, whether it's mental wellness or anything else, and it's like you might use it for a day or two. It has to be an
Yeah.
embedded thing, like an
And
evergreen.
a slow
Yeah,
burn
yeah.
with
Well, that's
consistency
how,
over
you know,
time.
the way the culture got to where it is in construction didn't happen overnight, and the change that we're
Exactly.
talking about here isn't going to happen overnight
Exactly.
either.
To me, to
And
me,
like,
it's logical.
yeah, no, no. And
Yes.
I always tell people, you know, I think largely we look at mental wellness through an initiative lens, right? Like a wellness
Yeah,
initiative.
exactly.
It's not. To me, it's an
No.
operational. I look at it from an operational
Yeah,
lens. On any
exactly.
given day, especially with all the stuff going on in the world and financial stress and this and that and kids and daycare and whatever, like people aren't working 100% at work because their mind is elsewhere, right? So if we could help them cope with that stress and increase their productivity at work even 5-10%, it's gonna they're gonna do more work, they're gonna stay longer because they're gonna be happier, they're gonna go home to their family happier at the end
Be
of the day, so
healthier.
everybody wins. So
Yeah.
to me, I look at it from an operational lens.
Oh, it's
So
critical professional development for overall
yeah,
functioning. I can't see it
yeah.
any other way.
So a
Yeah.
couple questions here just to close out. I
Yeah.
mean, we could probably go on for days here, but
I'm sure we could. We have to do a
what
follow-up.
what's what's one thing now, like you've been doing this a long time, what's one thing if you
Mhm.
could talk to, an executive in construction, whether it's a CEO, director, one
Mm,
thing they need to know, not something they want to hear, but something they need to
mhm.
hear about this mental wellness, what would it be?
If you don't teach the people in your company how to talk about mental health, your workforce has an expiration date.
Hmm.
And that's meant to be uncomfortable because the data is there, the loss of life is there, the
Hmm.
suffering is there, the desire is there. So you either give your people the skills and the tools they need, or watch your workforce implode. It's
Yeah.
really that simple, and it's not negotiable. So I tend to make these sort of statements to people based on irrefutable logic, not based on
Hmm.
emotion, not based on opinion. It's just fact. So I would say maybe a little more gentle.
No, for sure. No, no. Well, people need to hear the straight goods, right? And I think a lot
Yeah.
of might think, well, might cost money to do this and whatever. We're paying a ton in resources and time and money and everything in not doing
Mhm.
anything. The way the current thing is
Oh
set up.
yeah. And then if you want to keep putting billions and billions and billions and billions into lost dollars and sickness absence and avoidable very intense health claims. I mean, if this is a numbers game,
Hmm.
investing in this, if you want to sound like an ardent capitalist, it literally will save money down the
Yeah.
road and help an organization make money. I mean, to me, that's also very clear where the return on investment has been proven over and over and over again. So we can
Right.
either honor and action the data or be continuously led by bias and faulty narrative. This is the choice.
Hmm. I feel like there is a part two coming, but before we go here, tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about where can we find your books and learn more about what you're
Yeah.
doing.
So my website is melissadoman.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. On Instagram, it's at The Wandering Mel. And both of my books are available everywhere online and in most physical stores where you buy books. So the first one is, or the most recent one is Cornered Office, Why We Need to Talk About Leadership and Mental Health. And my first book is Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work. Here's why and how to do well. If you would like me to come in and, talk about mental health in a real, sustainable, action oriented way, I would love to hear from you and I would be happy to help.
Good stuff. Well, I appreciate your time, Melissa. Thanks a lot for coming on. It was very insightful.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, take care. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the human side of construction, and we'll see you on the next one.